3 years ago, I was a student working as a seasonal delivery driver during the holidays. It was a tough job, long hours, terrible weather, and always the pressure of meeting deadlines. But the pay was good, and I needed every cent I could get. My route that winter took me through rural Wisconsin, delivering packages to remote homes and farms. It was a week before Christmas, and the snow had been relentless all day. By the time I finished my last delivery, it was pitch black, and the storm had turned into a full-blown blizzard. I was miles from the main road, crawling along a narrow, snow-covered trail, when I realized I was running low on gas. I checked my GPS, but the signal was spotty. The nearest town was over 20 miles away, and there was no way I'd make it. That's when I saw a sign half buried in the snow. Tannen's Rest Stop, Gas and Supplies. The rest stop was barely visible through the storm, its lights glowing faintly in the distance. As I pulled into the lot, I could see it was more than just a gas station. It was a small general store, with an old wooden sign hanging over the entrance. A few other cars were parked outside, their windshields coated in ice. I parked near the pumps and stepped out into the cold. The wind was biting, and the snow was already up to my shins. Inside, the store was dimly lit and smelled faintly of dust and gasoline. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods, snacks, and random knickknacks. A single man stood behind the counter, flipping through a newspaper. "Evening," he said without looking up. His voice was raspy, almost mechanical. "Need gas?" "Yeah," I replied, shivering. "And a place to wait out the storm?" He nodded toward a small table near the back of the store. "You can sit over there. Storm should pass in a few hours." I filled up my tank, then went back inside to warm up. The table was next to a dusty heater that hummed quietly but barely gave off any warmth. The other customers, 2 men in heavy coats, were huddled by the coffee machine, talking in low voices. They barely glanced at me. As I sat there, sipping a cup of instant coffee, I noticed something strange. The shelves near the front of the store were lined with Polaroid pictures. Each one showed a different person, all standing in the same spot outside the store. The dates written on the photos were recent, December 14th, December 15th, but there was no sign of snow in any of them. I stood up to get a closer look. The faces in the photos were odd. Their expressions were stiff, like they were forced to smile, and their eyes seemed just a little too wide. "Local tradition," the man behind the counter said, startling me. "We take a photo of every visitor. Keeps things friendly." I forced a smile and nodded, but something about the photos made my stomach twist. The storm outside worsened, and the other 2 men eventually left. I debated staying longer, but the man behind the counter assured me the road ahead was clear enough. I didn't trust him, but I didn't want to stay there. As I walked out to my truck, I noticed something strange. The other cars were gone, but their tire tracks had already disappeared under the fresh snow. My truck was the only one left in the lot. I climbed inside and started the engine, but the feeling of unease lingered. As I backed out, I glanced at the store one last time. The man was still standing at the counter, staring at me through the window. He wasn't smiling anymore. The road was worse than I expected. The snow was falling so heavily that I could barely see the trees on either side of the trail. I was crawling along at a snail's pace, my headlights barely cutting through the white wall ahead of me. That's when I saw the figure. It was standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights. At first I thought it was a person, a tall man in a dark coat. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The figure was too still, too rigid, like a mannequin. I hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the icy road. The figure didn't move. Its head was tilted to one side, and its arms hung stiffly at its sides. I honked the horn, but it didn't react. My heart was pounding as I sat there, staring at the figure. The snow was piling up around it, but it remained motionless, like it was frozen in time. Finally, I decided to drive around it. I eased the truck forward, steering carefully to avoid the figure. As I passed it, I glanced out the window, and my breath caught in my throat. Its face was blank, just smooth, pale skin, with no features except for 2 dark holes where its eyes should have been. I slammed on the gas, the tires spinning on the icy road. I didn't stop until I was miles away. When I reached the highway, the storm had finally started to ease. I pulled over to catch my breath, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The rest stop felt like a bad dream, but the memory of that figure was burned into my mind. As I sat there, trying to calm down, I noticed something strange. There was a Polaroid photo stuck under the windshield wiper. I climbed out of the truck, my breath fogging in the cold air, and grabbed the photo. It was me, standing outside the rest stop. The date written on the bottom was that day. I don't remember driving home. All I know is I've never gone back to Wisconsin, and I've never taken another delivery job. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the car at night, I catch a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing perfectly still, its blank face tilted to one side. It was during one of those brutal December blizzards that I experienced the most terrifying night of my life. I worked as a wildlife researcher, and my job often took me to remote areas to monitor animal populations. That winter, I was stationed near the Rocky Mountains, tracking elk migration patterns. It was a lonely assignment, but I didn't mind, until that night. I had spent the day hiking through a frozen valley, documenting tracks and movement. By the time I made it back to my truck, the sun had already disappeared behind the peaks, and the temperature had plummeted. The snow was falling heavily now, erasing the trail I had used to get here. I climbed into the cab, grateful for the heater, and started driving back toward the cabin I had rented for the season. The forest road was narrow and winding, lined with tall, snow-laden pines. The headlights barely pierced the swirling storm, and the truck's tires crunched over the thick snow. I had driven this route dozens of times, but everything looked different in the blizzard. The landmarks were obscured, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After about 30 minutes of slow driving, I realized something was wrong. The road should have connected with the main highway by now, but all I saw were more trees and snow. I checked the GPS, but the signal was weak, and the screen was blank. Panic began to creep in as I realized I might be lost. I kept driving, hoping to find some sign of civilization. The storm only seemed to get worse, the snow piling higher and higher, making it harder to see the road. That's when I saw the lights. They were faint, glowing through the trees like beacons. I slowed down, squinting to make out their source. It looked like a house, no, a building of some sort. Relief washed over me as I realized it might be a ranger station or an inn. I followed the lights, turning onto a narrow path that seemed to lead directly to them. As I got closer, I saw it was an old gas station. The structure was weathered and sagging under the weight of the snow, but the lights above the pumps flickered faintly, and a dim glow came from the windows. I parked in front and stepped out into the biting cold. The storm was howling now, the wind whipping snow into my face as I made my way to the door. A bell jingled as I entered, and the warmth inside hit me like a wave. The station looked abandoned, but the lights were on. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with dusty cans and faded candy wrappers. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the flickering light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily. No one answered. The place felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I was about to turn back when I heard a door creak. A man stepped out from the back room. He was tall and gaunt, his face pale and drawn, with deep-set eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me with an unsettling intensity. "Storm's bad," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "You shouldn't be out." "I got lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was looking for the main highway." He nodded slowly. "Not far. You'll need to wait it out, though. Storm like this can swallow you whole." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to stay for a bit, warming up near the ancient radiator in the corner. The man disappeared into the back room again, leaving me alone. As I looked around, I noticed a bulletin board on the wall. It was covered in photographs, Polaroids, mostly, of people standing outside the station. Some of them were smiling, others looked serious, but their eyes all looked the same. Vacant. Hollow. Beneath each photo was a name and a date, written in shaky handwriting. The most recent one was from last year. I didn't recognize the name, but the face looked familiar, too familiar. It was the man I had just spoken to. I felt a chill run through me as I turned away from the board. That's when I noticed something else. In the corner of the room, there was a doorway, partially hidden by a curtain. It wasn't there when I first entered. The curtain swayed slightly, as if someone, or something, had just passed through. Against my better judgment, I moved toward the doorway. Beyond it was a narrow hall, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. I could hear faint sounds coming from the end of the hall, whispers, overlapping and distorted, like a broken radio. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped. I backed away, my heart pounding, and turned to leave the station. But as I reached the door, I froze. The snow outside was undisturbed. No tire tracks. No footprints. It was as if my truck had never been there. Panic set in as I ran outside, scanning the lot. My truck was gone. The storm raged around me, the snow falling so heavily that I could barely see the station behind me. I turned back, only to find that the station was gone too. I was standing alone in the middle of the forest, the snow piling up around me. The lights, the building, even the road, it had all vanished, swallowed by the storm. I stumbled forward, desperate to find some sign of where I was. That's when I saw the footprints. They led away from where the station had been, disappearing into the trees. The prints were deep, larger than any humans, and spaced too far apart. Whatever had made them wasn't walking, it was leaping. I didn't follow them. Instead, I turned and ran in the opposite direction, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm seemed to close in around me, the wind screaming like a living thing. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I saw headlights cutting through the darkness. A plow truck. The driver stopped and helped me climb inside. He didn't ask questions, just shook his head and muttered something about people getting lost in the storms all the time. I didn't tell him about the station or the footprints. I didn't think he'd believe me. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear those whispers again. Faint and distant, carried on the wind. And I know it's still out there, waiting. Back before my girlfriend Leah and I officially started dating, we would still hang out a lot. We both loved skiing, and her family had a small cabin in northern Maine, not far from Sugarloaf Mountain. This particular trip was supposed to be our first weekend getaway together, just the two of us. It was early January, and the weather forecast promised fresh powder, perfect for skiing. It was a 6-hour drive to get to the cabin. As we neared the property, the winding roads became more and more desolate. We hadn't seen another car for miles, and the long stretches of snow-covered forest made it feel like we were entering another world. The driveway to her cabin was so overgrown with trees and buried in snow that I barely noticed it until Leah shouted, "There it is! Slow down!" I turned onto the narrow path, the tires crunching through the fresh snow. The cabin was small but charming, with snow piled on the roof and icicles hanging from the gutters. A thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney, and the windows glowed faintly, promising warmth. The first thing we did was crank up the heat inside. The cabin was rustic, no running water, just a wood-burning stove, and an outhouse about 20 feet from the back porch. Leah assured me this was normal for the area. I didn't mind roughing it, but the thought of using the outhouse in the freezing cold didn't exactly thrill me. We spent that first evening relaxing. Leah made us a simple dinner, and we watched a movie on her laptop until we both fell asleep. Outside, the snow was falling steadily, and the wind howled through the trees, but inside, everything felt peaceful. The next morning, we woke early to get to the mountain. After breakfast, Leah mentioned she needed to use the outhouse before we left. I offered to go outside with her, but she laughed, calling me a city boy, and said she could handle it. While she was gone, I grabbed my jacket and went outside to load the skis into the car. That's when I noticed something odd: footprints in the snow. They weren't Leah's. These were larger, like boot marks, and they came from the forest. I followed the trail with my eyes as it circled the cabin, then disappeared into the trees. When Leah came back, I showed her the prints. She shrugged it off, saying it was probably a hunter or a hiker, even though the idea of someone wandering around the cabin at night made my skin crawl. We spent the day skiing, and for a while, I forgot about the footprints. By the time we returned to the cabin that evening, it was dark, and the snowstorm had picked up again. Leah lit a fire while I turned on the small battery-powered string lights she'd brought, which gave the room a cozy glow. We started drinking wine, laughing and sharing stories, until I felt the inevitable urge to use the bathroom. I wasn't thrilled about trudging through the snow to the outhouse, but Leah teased me into it, saying, "Come on, you'll survive." I grabbed my coat, boots, and phone, then headed outside. The wind bit at my face as I made my way to the outhouse. I shut the door behind me quickly to block out the cold. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They crunched softly in the snow outside, slow and deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding. "Leah?" I called out, but the wind swallowed my voice. The footsteps paused, then resumed, moving past the outhouse and toward the cabin. I texted Leah, "Are you outside?" The message didn't deliver. The signal was too weak out here. After a minute, I mustered the courage to peek outside. Using my phone's flashlight, I scanned the area. The footprints from earlier were still there, but now there was a fresh set, leading straight to the cabin. I ran back to the house, the snow stinging my face as I followed the trail. When I reached the porch, I saw Leah standing by the door, her face pale. She grabbed my arm and yanked me inside, locking the door behind us. "What's wrong?" I asked, out of breath. "There was a man," she whispered. "He knocked on the door. I thought it was you, but when I opened it, he just stood there. He didn't say anything." I slammed the door and turned off the lights. A chill ran through me. "Where did he go?" Leah pointed to the window. "He walked around the house. He was looking inside." I grabbed a flashlight and scanned the yard through the window. The storm had partially erased the footprints, but I could see faint impressions leading toward the forest. Leah's father had told her about a trapdoor in the cabin's floor that led to a small storage space. "There's an old shotgun down there," she said. "Just in case." I pried open the hatch and climbed down, finding the shotgun hanging on a rack. It was dusty, but loaded. I climbed back up, and we sat on the couch in the dark, listening. The wind howled outside, but beneath it, I thought I heard something else. Footsteps, crunching softly through the snow. They moved slowly, deliberately, circling the cabin again. I stood by the front door, clutching the shotgun, my breath coming in shallow gasps. When the footsteps stopped, I threw open the door and fired 2 shots into the air. The sound echoed through the woods, and for a moment, the night was silent. The footsteps didn't return. We didn't sleep that night, and at first light, we packed up and left. As we pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the cabin. The snow was pristine, except for a single trail of footprints leading back into the forest. When we told Leah's father what had happened, he seemed unfazed. "Probably just some hermit or hunter," he said. But something about the man's behavior didn't sit right with me. To this day, I can't explain it. But sometimes, when I'm out in the snow, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, watching.